No attorney, the judge asked. My brother laughed before I could answer. She can't afford one. A few people in the courtroom smiled. My father looked away, pretending not to hear. I stood alone in my old navy blue coat. A 62-year-old widow everyone had already decided was helpless. Then I slowly removed the coat and placed a sealed Pentagon folder on the table. Their lawyer stopped smiling. I looked straight at him and asked, "Who signed your security clearance?" The courtroom went so silent, I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. That was the moment my family realized they had mocked the wrong woman. My name is Rebecca Mitchell. I was 62 years old that morning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt 18 again. Not because I was hopeful, because I was standing in a room full of people who had already decided who I was before I opened my mouth. The courtroom sat in downtown Norfolk, Virginia, only a few miles from the naval base where I had spent most of my adult life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent 28 years serving my country, but somehow I was the one being treated like an outsider. My brother, Daniel, sat across the room beside our father. Neither looked at me. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. 3 years earlier, when my husband Robert died from pancreatic cancer, I thought grief would be the hardest thing I would ever carry. I was wrong. The hardest thing was discovering how quickly some people rewrite your value once the person who loved you is gone. Robert had always been the bridge between me and my family. He understood my silences. He understood why I never talked about deployments, medals, or the years I spent working in operations assignments I wasn't allowed to discuss. After he died, the bridge disappeared. Daniel started referring to me as the widow. My father stopped asking about my life altogether. When our mother's estate became the subject of a legal dispute, they treated me less like a daughter and more like an obstacle. According to Daniel, I was emotionally unstable. According to Daniel, I didn't understand finances. According to Daniel, I should simply accept whatever he decided was fair. The worst part was that my father never corrected him. Not once. The folder sitting beside me that morning contained documents I had promised myself I would never need. Service records, federal correspondence, letters of commendation, evidence. I hated that word. Evidence meant trust had already failed. As the hearing approached, Daniel leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You could have saved yourself the embarrassment and settled." I met his eyes calmly. "Maybe," he chuckled. That confidence told me something important. Daniel believed he knew every piece of the story. What he didn't know was that someone else had already recognized the name printed inside that Pentagon folder. And that person was about to walk through the courtroom doors. The hearing was scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock. By 9:45, most of the seats behind us were filled with relatives, attorneys, and a few longtime family friends who had somehow turned a legal dispute into a spectator event. I sat quietly and reviewed the documents in front of me. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying himself. Still carrying that folder around, he asked loudly enough for nearby people to hear. A few heads turned. "It's not going to change anything." I didn't answer. That only encouraged him. My brother leaned back in his chair and laughed. "You always did love pretending your military career made you important." A couple of our cousins exchanged uncomfortable looks. Daniel noticed and pushed harder. "Tell them about the classified missions." "Rebecca," his voice dripped with sarcasm. "Oh, wait. You never can." A few people chuckled. I felt the familiar sting in my chest. Not because strangers were laughing. Because my father was sitting 3 feet away and saying absolutely nothing. The same man who had attended my commissioning ceremony. The same man who had once pinned Lieutenant Bars onto my uniform. Now, he stared at the courtroom wall as if none of this involved him. Daniel reached toward a photograph lying on the table. It was an old picture from 20 years earlier. I was standing beside a military helicopter, wearing desert camouflage and dark sunglasses. He held it up. "See, this is Rebecca's favorite photo." More laughter. "She acts like she won World War III. I folded my hands together. People often mistake silence for surrender. The truth is, silence usually means you're deciding whether someone deserves an explanation. And Daniel had stopped deserving explanations years ago. Then something changed. A man sitting near the back of the courtroom stood up slowly. I hadn't noticed him when he entered. He looked to be in his late 60s. Gray hair, broad shoulders, the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime in uniform. His eyes never left the photograph in Daniel's hand. The amusement on his face disappeared completely. For several seconds, he stared at the image. Then he looked directly at me, not at Daniel, not at the attorneys. Me. His expression shifted from curiosity to recognition, and suddenly, I knew exactly who he was. The problem was that Daniel didn't. My brother was still smiling when the older man began walking toward our table. That was when I realized Daniel had no idea what he had just started. The older man stopped beside our table. For the first time all morning, Daniel looked uncertain. "Can I help you?" my brother asked. The man ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on me. Then he glanced down at the photograph still clutched in Daniel's hand. "You got that picture in Kandahar?" he asked quietly. I nodded. The room suddenly felt smaller. 2011, I said. His jaw tightened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he extended his hand. "Colonel James Walker, retired." A few people nearby straightened in their seats. The name carried weight. Even Daniel seemed to recognize it. I shook his hand. "It's been a long time, Colonel." "Too long." The smile that followed wasn't casual. It was the smile of someone who remembered something important. Something very few people in that room understood. Daniel laughed awkwardly. "So, you two know each other." Colonel Walker turned slowly toward him. "Know each other." He looked genuinely surprised. "Your sister saved 12 people on the worst day of my career." The courtroom went silent. Not completely, but enough. Enough for every word afterward to matter. Daniel blinked. "What?" The colonel pointed at the photograph. "That helicopter wasn't a photo opportunity." Nobody moved. Nobody laughed. The older man took a slow breath. "There was a sandstorm." His voice lowered. "Visibility was nearly zero. Communications were failing. We had wounded personnel trapped outside the extraction zone. I felt old memories stirring. The roar of rotor blades, the smell of fuel, the taste of dust. Things I spent years trying not to revisit." Walker continued. "Most pilots would have aborted." He looked at me. "She didn't." I looked down at my hands. People always imagine courage feels dramatic. Most of the time, it feels like having no good options. "The mission wasn't supposed to become public," I said quietly. "It never did," Walker replied. The colonel's eyes hardened slightly. "Which is why hearing people laugh about it is difficult." My father finally looked at me. Actually looked at me. For the first time that morning, confusion replaced certainty on his face. Daniel shifted in his chair. "Hold on," he said. "If that's true, why has nobody ever heard about it?" The question hung in the air. Colonel Walker stared at him for several seconds. Then he looked toward the sealed Pentagon folder resting beside me. A strange expression crossed his face. Recognition, concern, and something else. Something heavier. Because, he said carefully, that isn't even the part of the story that matters. The room became silent again, and this time, even the judge was listening. Daniel forced a laugh. Okay, so she flew a helicopter 20 years ago. That's impressive. But what does that have to do with this estate case? The confidence in his voice sounded thinner now. Colonel Walker didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the judge. Your Honor, may I? The judge nodded. Walker gestured toward the sealed Pentagon folder beside me. Open it. Rebecca. For a moment, I simply stared at the folder. I had carried those documents for years. Not because I wanted recognition, because one day I suspected I might need proof. Slowly, I broke the seal. Paper slid across the table, letters, commendations, official correspondence, and one document I had hoped never to use. Walker picked it up carefully. His expression hardened. Daniel, do you know what this is? My brother shook his head. It's an after-action review. The room was silent. Walker continued. A classified review connected to the Kandahar extraction. Daniel rolled his eyes. What does that have to do with anything? The colonel looked directly at him. Everything. Nobody laughed now. Not a single person. Walker raised the document. This report confirms that your sister wasn't simply a pilot. He paused. This operation succeeded because she ignored an order. A murmur moved through the courtroom. My father leaned forward. The judge removed his glasses. Walker continued. The original evacuation was canceled. Every eye fixed on him. Rebecca determined the intelligence was wrong. She went back anyway. I closed my eyes briefly. Even now, hearing it aloud felt uncomfortable. The colonel lowered the paper. 12 people came home alive because of that decision. The silence became heavier. Then came the part nobody expected. Walker pulled another document from the folder. His jaw tightened. This letter was addressed to Mr. Richard Mitchell. My father froze. The color drained from his face. Walker looked at him. You received this 14 years ago. Nobody moved. My father swallowed, slowly, painfully. Walker read a single line. Your daughter displayed extraordinary courage and leadership under fire. A champagne glass slipped from someone's hand in the back row. The sound echoed through the courtroom. I stared at my father. He couldn't meet my eyes. You knew, Daniel whispered. My father looked down. The answer was obvious. For 14 years, he had known, and for 14 years, he had said nothing. The room no longer belonged to Daniel. It no longer belonged to the case. It belonged to the truth. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The courtroom felt different now. Not louder, not dramatic, just honest. The kind of honesty people spend years avoiding because it costs too much. Daniel stared at our father. You knew. My father still couldn't lift his head. The silence between them said more than any explanation could. Finally, he spoke. I got the letter. His voice sounded older than I had ever heard it. I read it. A painful knot formed in my chest. Not because I was surprised, because part of me had always suspected the truth. You never told me, Daniel whispered. My father closed his eyes. I didn't know how. For 14 years, that had been his answer. Not anger, not hatred, shame. The judge eventually cleared his throat and returned the hearing to the estate matter. The legal outcome came quickly after that. Several of Daniel's claims were withdrawn. Documents that had been ignored were finally reviewed. The case shifted almost immediately, but strangely, none of that felt important anymore. The real verdict had already happened. The truth had finally entered the room. When the hearing ended, people began leaving quietly. Nobody laughed. Nobody made jokes. Nobody looked at me with pity. Colonel Walker stopped beside me before he left. "You deserved better," I smiled faintly. "Maybe." He shook his head. "No, definitely." Then he saluted. Not a ceremonial salute. Not a dramatic one. Just a simple gesture of respect. I returned it. After he walked away, I turned toward my father. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his coat pocket. His hand trembled slightly. He pulled out an old folded letter. The same letter. The one he had hidden for 14 years. "I should have given you this a long time ago." I accepted it carefully. "You should have." Tears filled his eyes, the first I'd ever seen from him. "I'm sorry, Rebecca." I studied his face. People often think forgiveness is a single moment. It isn't. It's a process, a choice made over time. Some wounds heal, some become scars, and some simply stop controlling your life. "I forgive you," I said quietly, "but things have to be different." He nodded. For once, there was no argument as I stepped out of the courthouse and into the afternoon sunlight. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not revenge, peace. The truth had finally arrived, and I no longer needed anyone's permission to be proud of who I was. One of the most valuable lessons in life is that your worth does not depend on whether others recognize it. Sometimes the people closest to us may misunderstand us, underestimate us, or fail to see the sacrifices we've made. But the truth remains the truth, even when no one applauds it. Real strength is staying true to yourself, carrying your dignity with grace, and letting your actions speak louder than your pain. In the end, respect earned through character lasts far longer than approval gained through pleasing others. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments what moment impacted you the most. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring story about honor, courage, and quiet strength.